Clara Jennings was found in a lonely field with every trace of her identity destroyed, her face mutilated, her fingerprints burned, her belongings missing. Hannah Jennings, her older sister, stood before cameras in tears, begging for justice. And Victor Hale, a disgraced businessman turned shadowy criminal, vanished just as Clara disappeared. 3 names, 3 lives intertwined in secrets, lies, and betrayal. But only one of them knew the truth behind the body in the grass and the faint tattoo that refused to stay silent. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that only happens before the town wakes up. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling weak light over the rolling fields outside Willow Creek. A local farmer named Henry was walking the perimeter of his property, the same routine he had followed for decades, checking his fences and looking over the crops. As he reached the far end of the field, something in the tall grass caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be an animal tangled in the weeds, but as he moved closer, his steps slowed. It wasn't an animal at all. It was the body of a young woman lying unnaturally still, half hidden by the dew-covered grass. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale, and the earth around her seemed disturbed, as if someone had dragged her to that spot during the night. Henry froze, the air stuck in his chest. He had lived through many hardships in his life, but nothing prepared him for the sight in front of him. He backed away, fumbling with his phone, and called the authorities. Police cars pulled onto the dirt road, their flashing lights slicing through the morning fog, and officers carefully taped off the area. Detectives and forensic teams quickly realized this wasn't an ordinary case. The body had been left intentionally positioned in a way that made identification nearly impossible. The victim's face had been mutilated beyond recognition, almost as if someone wanted to erase who she had been. Her fingertips were charred, each ridge and line of her prints destroyed. There was no purse, no phone, no jewelry, nothing that could give away a name. It was as though every detail that could have told the world who this woman was had been deliberately taken from her. The scene told a story of both violence and planning. Whoever did this had gone to great lengths to ensure she could not be identified. Yet, in their thoroughness, they had left behind something they might not have noticed. On her ankle, barely visible under the dirt and dried blood, was a small tattoo. It was faded and simple, the outline of a rose with numbers etched just beneath it. For the investigators, this was the only surviving clue in a puzzle that otherwise had no edges. As officers carefully examined the ground, they found faint tire tracks leading away from the field. The impressions were shallow, as though the vehicle had stopped briefly before speeding off again. But the soil was too dry to capture a clear tread pattern, leaving only partial marks that could not be matched immediately. A few broken branches suggested the victim had been carried or dragged from the roadside into the grass. Beyond that, there was nothing. No discarded belongings, no signs of a struggle, no footprints distinct enough to follow. News of the discovery spread quickly through Willow Creek, a town unaccustomed to crime of this magnitude. Rumors ran wild, with residents whispering about strangers seen passing through, or about old grudges resurfacing. The lack of answers only deepened the sense of unease. For investigators, the mystery wasn't just about finding the killer. It began with the much harder question. Before they could know who had done this, they first needed to know, who was she? The investigators knew that if they wanted to give the woman back her name, they had to start with the only clue she had left behind. The tattoo on her ankle became the center of the case. It was not just a decoration. It was a possible signature of her identity. A small rose, its petals etched in delicate lines, with a set of numbers beneath it. The numbers did not make immediate sense. They could have been anything: random digits, a date, or even a personal code. The detectives took countless photographs of it and sent them to experts, but no definitive answer came back. The tattoo was too unique to be ignored, and too vague to lead to quick answers. Still, it gave them something to chase. Their first move was to canvass tattoo parlors within a 50-mile radius. Each artist was shown the photograph, asked if they had ever done something similar. Most shook their heads. Some said the style looked familiar, but it was too generic to be sure. Weeks passed, and the frustration grew. Every day that went by without identification made the victim feel more like a shadow than a person. Detectives began to worry that the killer's plan had worked, that the young woman would remain nameless forever. Then, in a small shop on the edge of town, a breakthrough finally surfaced. The tattoo artist, an older man with years of work behind him, studied the picture for a long moment before nodding slowly. He said he remembered doing something nearly identical a couple of years ago. He couldn't recall the exact date, but he vividly remembered the client. A young woman, mid to late 20s, came in alone. She paid in cash, avoided small talk, and kept glancing toward the window as though she expected someone to follow her. When asked if she wanted the tattoo anywhere visible, she specifically requested it be placed on her ankle, hidden, almost secretive. She had given her name at the time as Clara. For detectives, it was the first real lead. Clara might not have been her real name, but it was a thread worth pulling. They checked missing persons reports for anyone with that name, but nothing fit immediately. Clara wasn't reported missing, at least not under that name. Still, the detail that she had been so nervous during her appointment hinted that she might have been hiding from something or someone. Investigators dug deeper into local databases, searching for anyone named Clara who had been in the area during the past few years. The name brought up dozens of records, but most didn't match. Some were too old, others too young, and none appeared connected to the field outside Willow Creek. It was like trying to match a single puzzle piece without knowing what picture it belonged to. Despite the uncertainty, the tattoo gave them momentum. Detectives expanded their search beyond town lines, looking into surrounding counties and neighboring states. They requested information from national missing persons databases, hoping a Clara with a rose tattoo might appear. While the effort took time, it meant the young woman in the field was no longer completely lost. She had a potential identity, a potential past. But with every step forward came new questions. If she was indeed Clara, why had no one reported her missing right away? Why had she been so cautious when getting something as permanent as a tattoo? Most importantly, who had wanted her erased so thoroughly that even her fingertips were destroyed? The tattoo had cracked open the door, but behind it, the mystery only deepened. The discovery that the woman might be Clara Jennings changed the entire investigation. Detectives began piecing together her life, starting with what little they knew. Clara had been 27, living in a modest apartment in the heart of the neighboring city. On paper, she seemed ordinary. She worked as a junior accountant at a small firm, paid her rent on time, and rarely drew attention to herself. But as investigators dug deeper, they quickly realized her life was more complicated than it appeared. Behind the tidy records and quiet demeanor, Clara had been keeping secrets. Her employer described her as polite and efficient, though distant. She didn't socialize with coworkers, rarely attended office gatherings, and often stayed late, working alone in the glow of her computer screen. Her bank records painted a stranger picture. While her salary was modest, her account showed large, irregular deposits that didn't match her earnings. The money would appear suddenly and just as quickly disappear, withdrawn in cash. It wasn't the behavior of someone saving for the future. It was the kind of movement police associated with hidden dealings. When investigators obtained access to her phone records, the mystery deepened. There were dozens of calls made over several months to the same number, a number registered under a false name and untraceable address. The calls varied in length, sometimes lasting only a minute, other times stretching to hours. Each conversation had been deliberately hidden from her contacts list. Whoever was on the other end was someone Clara did not want the world to know about. Detectives tracked the number to a storage unit rented under yet another false name. When they raided it, they found something that turned the case upside down. The unit contained boxes of forged documents, passports, driver's licenses, and identification cards from multiple states, all linked to financial accounts. Alongside them were stacks of unmarked cash and ledgers filled with cryptic notes of transactions. It became clear Clara had been tangled in something much bigger than her quiet job suggested. She wasn't simply a victim of random violence. She was connected to a network of fraud and deception. Neighbors from her apartment building recalled odd details that, in hindsight, seemed telling. Clara had lived alone, but often looked nervous coming home, glancing around the parking lot before unlocking her door. Some residents said they noticed unfamiliar cars parked nearby at night, engines idling before disappearing into the darkness. Others remembered hearing her crying through the thin walls, though she always smiled politely in the hallway, as if nothing were wrong. Her past also revealed inconsistencies. She had grown up only a few towns away, but she had cut ties with many friends and relatives years before. Few people seemed to know much about her adult life, and when police contacted her estranged family, they admitted they hadn't spoken to her in years. For them, the news of her possible death was both shocking and distant, as though she had become a ghost long before she was found in that field. The pieces began to align in troubling ways. Clara was not simply living a quiet, ordinary life. She was connected to someone dangerous, someone with resources, someone who valued secrecy above all else. Investigators began to believe that her murder was not just about silencing her, but about protecting an operation she had stumbled into, or perhaps even helped maintain. Whatever Clara knew had made her a target, and the lengths taken to erase her identity suggested that her killers feared what might be uncovered if she was recognized. As investigators sifted through the storage unit and the records connected to Clara, one name surfaced again and again in the ledgers: Victor Hale. The name wasn't new to law enforcement. He had once been a respected businessman in the area, owning a string of small investment firms, but his success had crumbled when accusations of fraud began circling, followed by lawsuits and unpaid debts. Victor had slipped out of the public eye, and whispers about his activities grew darker over time. To police, the discovery of his name in Clara's hidden documents was not just a coincidence, it was a red flag waving in the middle of the case. They began building a picture of him through financial trails and old contacts. Victor had built a second life in the shadows after his fall from grace. He operated under shell companies, funneled money through offshore accounts, and used trusted intermediaries to keep his name clear of direct involvement. The ledgers in Clara's possession detailed some of these transactions, suggesting she had been keeping tabs on him for reasons no one yet understood. Each entry seemed precise, almost obsessive, as if Clara had been collecting evidence. Detectives speculated she may have stumbled upon his network by accident, through her accounting job. Perhaps she had noticed inconsistencies in client accounts, or found herself pulled into laundering money unknowingly. What unsettled them most was the possibility that she hadn't just uncovered Victor's dealings, she had actively tried to expose them. The ledgers, carefully organized, pointed not to participation but to preparation, as though Clara had been building a case in secret. Victor's presence around the time of Clara's disappearance made him an even more obvious suspect. Witnesses placed him in the city weeks before she vanished, yet after her body was discovered, he was nowhere to be found. His apartment was empty, his business fronts abandoned, and his phone disconnected. It looked less like a man on the run, and more like someone who had planned his exit in advance. Every sign suggested he had disappeared just before the murder, making investigators believe he had orchestrated it to protect himself. Yet, despite the suspicion, Evidence directly linking him to the crime was thin. No fingerprints, no DNA, no camera footage tied him to Clara or to the field where she was found. It was a shadow chase, following the outline of a man who seemed to leave nothing tangible behind. Detectives wondered if Victor had ordered the killing but hadn't carried it out himself. His reputation for manipulation and using others to do his dirty work fit neatly into this theory. The deeper investigators looked, the more tangled the picture became. Victor had a circle of associates, each with something to lose if his empire collapsed. Former employees, girlfriends, and silent partners surfaced in the investigation, but they either refused to talk or vanished before they could be questioned. It was as if Victor's entire world was built on silence, with fear holding it together. Just when detectives began to feel they were circling endlessly around Victor without progress, an anonymous tip shifted everything. A caller claimed Victor was not the one who ended Clara's life. The voice on the line suggested the truth was closer to home, pointing toward someone Clara trusted. For weeks, investigators had focused on Victor as the looming villain behind the scenes. Now, they had to consider the possibility that Clara's killer was not a shadowy businessman, but someone far more personal. The anonymous call shifted the tone of the entire investigation. Detectives had been convinced for weeks that Victor Hale was the mastermind behind Clara's death, the one with the most to lose if she exposed his network. But the caller's words gnawed at them, refusing to be ignored. They began re-examining the evidence with fresh eyes, retracing every step and asking a new question. If not Victor, then who else would have both motive and opportunity? Slowly, the focus turned toward the one person who had seemed above suspicion, Clara's older sister, Hannah. Hannah had been visible from the very beginning, helping with appeals for information, crying in front of reporters, and appearing heartbroken at candlelight vigils. She painted the picture of a grieving sibling desperate for answers. At first, investigators hadn't considered her closely. Family members are often questioned, but Hannah's alibi had been vague yet believable, and her tears seemed genuine. It wasn't until forensic analysts reviewed the physical evidence with greater precision that small cracks began to appear. Fibers found on the rope used to bind Clara were consistent with a blanket from Hannah's home. At first, the match was dismissed as possible contamination, but then more unsettling connections emerged. A faint trace of Hannah's DNA appeared on the bindings themselves, not just on items near them. It was enough to raise suspicion, but not enough for certainty. Investigators revisited her financial records and found troubling details. Hannah, a schoolteacher with modest income, had recently made significant purchases: a new car, expensive jewelry, and a down payment on a property in another state. The timing of these acquisitions aligned eerily with the cash movements connected to Victor Hale's accounts. It began to look less like a grieving sister, and more like someone entangled in the same network Clara had been tracking. The theory grew darker as detectives pieced together the timeline. Clara had been planning to deliver her records and evidence against Victor to authorities. If she succeeded, not only would Victor's operation collapse, but anyone tied to him would be exposed as well. Records suggested Hannah wasn't merely aware of Victor's schemes, she had been complicit. Whether through greed, desperation, or manipulation, she had tied herself to his criminal dealings, and Clara's determination to come forward threatened both of them. The idea of Hannah as the killer felt almost unthinkable. Sisters bound by blood, growing up together in the same small town, sharing childhood memories. Yet betrayal within families is often the most devastating. Investigators began to believe that Hannah's motive wasn't just survival, but also jealousy and resentment. Clara, the quiet and watchful one, had been preparing to take control, to expose the lies. Hannah, on the other hand, had lived a life of restraint and limited means. Victor's money offered her a way out, a taste of freedom she didn't want to lose. In her mind, Clara's actions endangered everything she thought she deserved. The truth unraveled in fragments. Neighbors reported seeing Hannah visiting Clara the night she disappeared. Security footage placed her car near the area where the body was later found. Bit by bit, the image of a grieving sister collapsed into that of a calculating accomplice. What finally tied her to the crime beyond doubt was a small mistake. Her fingerprints, faint but undeniable, pressed into the tape used to seal Clara's mouth. In the end, it wasn't Victor Hale's shadowy empire that erased Clara's identity. It was her own sister's betrayal, carried out in desperation and concealed beneath an act of mourning. Every effort had been made to strip away who Clara was, but one small detail, the tattoo on her ankle, remained. That rose, overlooked and nearly forgotten, pulled apart the layers of lies and revealed the truth. The victim, who had been meant to disappear forever, was not only given back her name, but also her story, and with it, the shocking revelation that the hand which ended her life had once held hers in childhood.